Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. Thanks again to you guys for joining us. We're doing a draft. We are drafting the 10 most important people in the college football playoff race for 2022. And Shehan, we've been discussing the parameters. Nothing more fun than parameters. We are each going to draft 5 people. You were going to do this for yourself, but you were going to let me do whatever I want because, I'm not as advanced as you. I'm sort of I have to have the simpler context, right? You're on the advanced level and I'm on the basic level. So you're going to let me draft 5 famous people while you drafted, backup safeties and explained why they were so important to the playoff race. But we've actually decided we're each going to draft 5 people. 1 head coach each, 1 quarterback each, max. You don't have to take a quarterback or a head coach, but your list can't be Nick Saban, Ryan Day, Dabo Swinney. Is that appropriate?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, if you're familiar with golf, I was ready to give you the handicap, but I guess we're evening it up. Yeah. We'll see if this game is fair as usual, but no, I mean, I think, look, Bryce Young's going to get picked. Nick Saban's going to get picked. Don't worry. But I do think that it is interesting to kind of go a little deeper than that. I think that this show was built around trying to get a little deeper than that. And so, we can list 5 quarterbacks and 5 coaches some other time. But this is, I think, where trying to figure out some of those other names who really might play a part could get really interesting.
I was not informed about that this show goes deeper. I wish we would have talked about that before we had started this whole thing. What if this whole thing, I'm dumb, right? People will come on the thing, you're smart, I'm dumb. What if it's a long con and I'm just waiting for the right episode to be wait, he's smart, right? Maybe that's a good tease. Make people listen for the next 5 years. Oh, I'm just going to keep waiting for the episode where Doug suddenly reveals himself as smart. Maybe it's this week.
What's the payoff? We're not betting, or you're not hustling me. I don't. What's the payoff?
My wife asked me that same question. Yeah, that someday he's going to be a competent husband. Oh, great! What a gag! Nice prank. Nice 36 years of marriage prank.
Got him.
Haha! I'm not a buffoon. I will say I'm not drafting Bryce Young because here's how I try to look at it.
Okay.
So I tried to how do I explain? How does Doug explain what his brain says? I want it to be the biggest gap, right? That if this person is great or terrible, and maybe both things are on the table, that Bryce Young. So DJ Uiagalelei would have turned out to be a great pick a year ago. Right? Because if you thought, hey, this guy's a top 3 Heisman contender, and then it turns out he's the 10th best quarterback in his own conference, and that wide range of play had a tremendous effect on Clemson's playoff hopes. I think DJ Uiagalelei, actually, if we did this do it in reverse. If we did it backwards, I think he might be the number 1 pick last year. Who had the biggest impact on the playoff race? Now, of course, you could get into, but if we were doing Georgia, my pick for Georgia, I don't think would be Jordan Davis or Nakobe Dean.
I don't know if there would be a pick for Georgia, honestly.
But it might be Stetson Bennett. That Stetson Bennett is good enough, right? Now, as a quarterback, we're talking 2 quarterbacks, those are obvious, but he was good enough, and that did it, right? You know who would have been a huge pick? Aiden Hutchinson. Probably as a number 1 pick, right, is up there with DJ the other way. Michigan doesn't make the playoff without Aiden Hutchinson. With him, they do make the playoff. Maybe he's the number, but that's what we're kind of looking for here.
I would push back, though, because I do think that heading into the year, Bryce Young and DJ Uiagalelei, you probably would have almost leaned DJ with what he showed the year before. And so I actually do think that Bryce Young's variance is the reason that Alabama played for a national championship.
That actually is a good point.
Yes. But listen, if you're not going to take him, I'll happily take him.
But is there variance with him now? Last year there was variance because he hadn't started before. Now he's the reigning Heisman winner. Nobody thinks well, who would have had huge variance? Spencer Rattler wound up having huge variance. He would have been a huge pick if we were going backwards, right?
So yes, they did lose 2 first-round wide receivers. I think that there is still a lot to think about there. Now, again, there's only going to be 2 quarterbacks picked. It might not end up being Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, it might end up being somebody completely different. But I don't know. I'll be curious. I think that we'll get into this, and I think that who we pick as each of our head coach and each of our quarterback will actually be really interesting.
All right, we're trying to be smart, interesting, and clever. Again, this. I do need a handicap. If that. Oh, what's Doug's clever handicap? He's like a plus 21. So we're trying to. We want you. It's not just the most obvious. We're going to be graded on. We want you, the listeners, when we make our picks, to be like, "Wow, that was a great pick." Right. So that's the judgment of a great pick. So I also feel like I should get to go first, because I'm so stupid.
Please.
So can I now? So if I'm going to go first, I am going to do a super. Now I'm going to go super obvious and just be super obvious. But I do think there is variance here. And I do think this is somewhat not untested, but a little more unknown than other people in this person's position. And I'll take Lincoln Riley, because I'm taking Lincoln Riley, the head coach, not just Lincoln Riley, the offensive play caller, quarterback guru, guy who can scheme up 60 points. I'm taking Lincoln Riley. Can I build a team of transfer parts and become a national title contender in year one? We saw Mel Tucker last year at Michigan State build a team a lot out of the transfer portal that was a top 10 team. Mel Tucker brought that together. Jordan Addison, the latest addition in the portal at USC. It's basically like it's like the Heat or whatever, right? It's like a super team. It's like there were a couple guys who were there, but they're bringing everybody in. I don't know if there's like a team, not, like a team builder outside, like, leadership coach at USC that I should have picked instead of Lincoln Riley. But the question is, can you take the pieces and make a team? Because, man, they keep adding pieces. I know you wrote a piece. I was just reading it. Can I tell you the joy it brings my heart when I'm in the Google machine? Jordan Addison I'm going to Google Jordan Addison, USC transfer. Pops up, CBS Sports, Shehan Jeyarajah. And I scream at my laptop, I know that guy. Like Will Ferrell, when Santa comes in, I know him. That's you. So I was reading your story. Again, this is part of my handicap. It's like, what's Doug's research? Read what Shehan wrote. I was reading all about, but there's all these things, right? Caleb Williams, Mario Williams from Oklahoma, Travis Dye from Oregon, all these pieces. Is it going to be a team? If he can make it a team, and I must feel bad taking this because you had already picked USC as a playoff team 6 weeks ago, but right, if it comes together, they're kind of there, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, I'll have another story coming out today that should be up by the time that that this podcast is out, where I kind of go through the biggest challenge facing every first-year head coach. And for Lincoln Riley, I just very simply said win. You have to win right away. There's no waiting period. If Lincoln Riley doesn't win 10 games in year one, it is a failure. It is 100% a failure. And that is the most absurd expectation for any coach to ever have in the history of college football. But guess what, Lincoln Riley? That's what happens when you sign a $100 million contract to leave Oklahoma and then bring in the greatest transfer recruiting class of all time, including a potential preseason top 5 Heisman guy in Caleb Williams and the Biletnikoff winner in Jordan Addison. You have to win right now. There is no waiting game. There's no waiting period. I think that obviously Utah has a chance to be that team from the Pac-12. So I'm not saying they have to make the playoff or necessarily win the Pac-12 in year one, but they damn well better come second if they really want this to be considered a successful year.
Is it fair to wonder, not doubt, but to wonder about what kind of head coach Lincoln Riley is? Not the offensive stuff, but when you talk about Saban, he's a defensive genius, he's a recruiting mastermind, but there's a lot of culture and structure stuff, right? I think Dabo Swinney has a culture at Clemson. Ryan Day at Ohio State talks a lot about culture. I'm not going to pretend that that's not, every head coach has that to some extent. As an outsider, when I think of Lincoln Riley, that's not what I think. I think of offensive acumen. but there is something here, right, to bring the parts together. Is it fair to wonder about that, or is that just a silly thing of like, well, how could a guy win this many games if he doesn't have a great culture?
Yeah, I think that what becomes interesting is Oklahoma fans, by the way, have been making this case since the second that Lincoln Riley left, and it definitely has nothing to do with the fact that Lincoln Riley left. But I think a very interesting and maybe legitimate point that they do have is that their best team was probably the first team after Stoops, and they've slightly atrophied since then. Now, I think that's a little overstated. They've won 11 games every year. It's not that big of a deal. Sometimes you just hit on players that you didn't before. But I do think that, and I think that I think that we've had this conversation a little bit with both Lincoln Riley and with Ryan Day. I think that sometimes when you have a schematic offensive head coach, right? That was the wave a couple of years ago, right? Everybody wanted Sean McVay. Everybody wanted that. I think that we started to see a reversion back to defense because I think that it's tough to both be so focused on offense all the time and also instill a tough physical culture in your team. I think that doing both of those things at the same time can be very difficult. And now, with both of these guys, I mean, one, they're so good at building and recruiting teams, and they're obviously just so good at coaching football that they've been able to win their conference a whole bunch and be in the playoff and all that sort of stuff. But I am curious when it comes to team cultures. I think that Ryan Day has seeded some of that to try to figure out, how can we kind of, build this out. And I'm going to be curious now at USC, do they run into the same issues? Because I look at the last 3 NFL drafts. 10 Oklahoma defensive players were drafted in the last 3 NFL drafts, including 5 in the first 3 rounds. This has not been a talent issue at Oklahoma when it comes to defense. It's been a cultural issue. It's been a balance issue. I am going to be curious, with Lincoln Riley coming in, and he's going to have all the cards, and at Oklahoma, they have one of the most stable administrations in the country with Joe Castiglione leading the way as athletic director. It's going to be different. It's all going to be on Lincoln Riley, and every one of his strengths is going to come out more than ever, and every one of his weaknesses are going to come out more than ever. So I'm curious. I definitely am curious, and I do think, whether it's year 1 or whether it's year 2, I think that they have to win, or we're going to have to start asking some questions about Lincoln Riley.
Was he your head coach that you would have picked, or no?
He was up there. I'm not making this a hard and fast rule. I was probably going to try to limit myself to one guy from each team.
Yeah.
And so Lincoln Riley, and then, again, we'll get to more Caleb Williams and Alex Grinch. Those are the 3 guys that I considered. And so I'm not going to take a USC guy with this first pick. I think that I'll save them for later, but I think that those 3 guys all have a very legitimate case to be picked in this draft.
Yeah, Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator. That's another guy on that list. Okay, so Lincoln Riley, first pick. Did you think it was clever? Not super clever.
I think that it was correct. I think it was a correct.
Thank you. My picks will get more cleverer as we go along, though. Yeah, so.
Looking forward to it.
By the end, you'll think I'm the cleverest boy. That's my
Can't wait.
Whenever I do anything, like if I'm trying to think, if I lift like a 15-pound box of something and carry it in my house, or if I'm trying to think what would be a thing. If we have to step across a puddle and I like step across like a puddle and I have to jump like 1.5 feet, I'll often ask my wife if she thinks I'm the bravest boy because if I just did that. Again, let's just make a list of top 10 reasons that Doug's wife should be done with him. So but on this podcast, I don't care if I'm brave. I just want to be clever. Who's your first pick?
I do have to mention, Doug right now is wearing a hat that says never grow up. I just feel like that ties into all of this, if I'm being perfectly honest, but
it's a Peter Pan hat.
I like it. I like it. Okay. My first pick. I am also going to get my head coach out of the way. And which by the way is not the smartest drafting strategy because Doug literally can't take another head coach, but I'm just going to go with my head coach first. Cause like you said, I think that it's better to go obvious and then kind of maybe get a little clever or further down the list. I'm going to go with Dabo Swinney.
Okay.
So Dabo Swinney is proven. Dabo Swinney's the number 2 coach in college football, and I don't think it's that close. Actually, we released our list of every Power 5 coach last week, and for some reason, Kirby Smart is number 2 ahead of Dabo Swinney, and I lost my mind when I realized that. That was not my ballot. I can promise you that.
Nice.
Dabo Swinney is the consensus number 2 coach. If you take Nick Saban off the board, which, someday, 25 years down the road, he'll finally retire, Dabo Swinney is the guy. He's won multiple national championships. He built something at a school that does not win like that, right? Clemson is not one of these programs, but he made it one of these programs with what he's been able to do both on and off the field. And I think that he is now facing his biggest challenge ever. For so long, for literally a decade, he had Brent Venables at defensive coordinator to ensure himself that he was going to have one of the top 10 to 15 defenses in the country every single year. I think that once Jeff Scott left for South Florida, we've seen a little bit of atrophy on the offensive side of the ball, and now Tony Elliott's gone. So they promoted internally for both positions. These are guys who have been around the program, so it will be consistency. I'm not saying it's not consistency, but it is a different dynamic having somebody other than Tony Elliott and Brent Venables lead those respective units. And that's not to say they won't be successful. They're still very talented, especially on defense. I think the defense might actually come along quicker than the offense just because of what they bring back. But you're asking now a first-year coordinator to fix DJ Uiagalelei. That's a lot to ask. And so, I have a lot of faith in Dabo Swinney. I think that, again, he is that dude that's not Nick Saban, right? Like, he has been that good. But this is a critical moment in the program's history at Clemson, in my opinion, because they're either going to keep on chugging, which they did after they lost Chad Morris to SMU, right? They just promoted and kept on going. But I think this is a different challenge because of the amount of consistency that they've had and the amount of success that they've had. And this is going to be the moment where it kind of depends. Is Clemson going to continue to be Clemson long-term? Or is this sort of the inevitable fall of, which every team goes through? No team is good forever, and that doesn't change anything about what Dabo Swinney's legacy is. But are they going to continue to be that team that runs the ACC, makes the playoff, wins national championships? This is the first year where I think we find out.
I do think there's a couple different things at play. One is that Dabo just sort of has I don't know if I say conservative or old fashioned or just whatever, but like with the NIL world and that kind of thing, he has said a lot of things that like he doesn't particularly like where the sport is headed with name, image, and likeness and transfer portal and that kind of thing. And they have not been particularly active in the transfer portal. And I don't know that Clemson is set up to take advantage of NIL as much as some other teams in larger areas are. So there's that part of it. I also think we see the ACC might be getting its stuff together a little bit. If Mario Cristobal in Miami become a thing, if Dave Doran at NC State has his best team this year, is Mac Brown, is North Carolina actually on the rise? Maybe that conference is less his domain, right? He just because everybody else is getting a little bit better. And then the assistants. Now it's hard. Listen, you're a head coach. You pay your assistants well. You empower them. You create a place where people want to stay, where they're not jumping for any head coach opportunity. They're waiting for the right head coach opportunity. That's a good job by the head coach to keep Brent Venables and Tony Elliott around for as long as he kept them. And then when they leave, it's like, maybe you stink, and it's all your coordinators. And it's like, what do you mean? It's like, I helped keep them here. So I do think it's interesting. This could be the fall of the Clemson Empire. If it is going to fall, it's going to start. Last year was the beginning crumbling, and now it's going to be like, yep, nope, they're done. They're done. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but you could see maybe this is the line. So I do think for as established and successful as he is, it is interesting to have, again, not doubts, but to wonder this much about a guy who's been this good, because there's a lot in place that's changing around Clemson.
Yeah, this is an inflection point, I think, more than anything else, right? This is the moment where they either sink or swim, where they evolve or die. And Dabo Swinney, like you mentioned, I mean, people talk about what they, say that they love about college football Swinney's program has embodied all of it, right? He is the guy who players love to play for this program, and they believe in him, and they're very media friendly, and they do things the right way, sort of thing, right? He's always been kind of a foil to Nick Saban, who is the like battened down and closed off and all this sort of stuff. And so it's going to be interesting, right? Because that, I think, is less of an advantage in a world where players are transferring all the time. I mean, they took one transfer this year, and it was a bounce back quarterback who went to Northwestern and was like, "This sucks. I'm coming home," to basically be a quarterback coach in the room. So they at this point have not taken advantage of the transfer portal. You see Alabama, of course, lining up guys at every one of their positions of need, and it's not going to be like that at Clemson. I don't think that they're going to do that long term. So it'll be interesting. I mean, again, if this is the fall of the Clemson Empire, like, that says nothing about Dabo Swinney as a coach or his legacy or his ability or anything like that. His legacy is secure. He won 2 national championships, but I do think it'll be interesting to see. It happens with every program. Almost every program in the sport gets passed up at some point. Is this a moment that it happens at Clemson? It'll be interesting to figure out.
I got a clever one.
Okay.
Pick 3 coming next on the College Football Survivor Show.
Don't miss the College Football Survivor Show bonus episode this week. Available only on Apple Podcasts.
Doug and Shehan are back. 2 head coaches in the house. I'm going player, non-quarterback. And you sort of mentioned it, Shehan. Alabama fill-in gaps. And I'm going to pick a gap they filled pretty recently. And I'm taking Tyler Steen, tackle Vanderbilt, who is now tackle Alabama. Alabama got through most of spring football. Was like, you know what? We need a starting left tackle. And there was a starting left tackle from Vanderbilt in the portal. And they were like, come on. So Tyler Steen is there. The guys that they tried at left tackle in the spring, Amari Kite, he's a 4th-year guy. Kendall Randolph, he's a 6th-year guy. Neither of them have played that much in their careers. Kendall Randolph's actually played a little tight end at times. Kendall Randolph was the number 180 overall player in the class of 2017. Amari Kite, the number 76 overall player in the class of 2019. These are guys, they were big recruits, but they've been there a long time and not really done much. Now, Evan Neal was there at left tackle. So when Evan Neal, maybe the best left tackle in the country, consensus All-American, is there, it's like, okay, well, nobody else gets to play. But we talked a lot on this podcast a year ago about Chris Owens, the right tackle at Alabama. So now it's probably Steen at left tackle, and then J.C. Latham, who was a 5-star recruit a couple years ago, looks like the guy at right tackle for now. But a year ago, it was like, oh, they have one tackle problem, but their other tackle is the best tackle in the country. Now we're not sure about either tackle, and we're not that sure about the entire offensive line, and they have a new offensive line coach. This is the Alabama offensive line question. It's the number 1 question about Alabama this year. But Shehan, it's one of those things. It's Saban keeps telling us, if you're going to let me do it, I'm going to do it. So they went and got another starter in the SEC. This is like the exact thing I think that teams would not want in the portal. It's like, oh, Vanderbilt, how are you? You're the worst program in the SEC. What do you have, one good player? They're like, yeah, we have one good player. Don't take him, Nick. And Nick's like, sorry, we need him. So, but also if you're Alabama, it's like, hey, you're Alabama. You're trying to win the national title. Who's your left tackle? And this Vanderbilt guy is like, well, is that how you want to be doing that? Like, it's interesting to me that Alabama needs to go get a Vanderbilt guy at left tackle. So I think him specifically is actually the pick, but also it's a way to talk about offensive line. But again, like he has to be good for them because they didn't like what they saw in spring among the other left tackle options.
Yeah, many people are saying Nick Saban can't win without Kyle Flood. It's crazy. Who would have thought? But
that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about Kyle Flood. Former Rutgers coach, just, propping up the Saban dynasty.
I've heard people say that he's a pretty nice man. So, I'll take that. Anyway, Alabama's offensive line last year watching Alabama was so weird because you're just like, this isn't Alabama. This is their scout team, right? Like this is not this is not the deal. And actually, that's where I go back to the Bryce Young thing, right? He covered up a lot.
Yes.
He covered up a lot for that offensive line. Like you mentioned, Evan Neal, the most physically gifted offensive tackle in the country. They have some guys that I like on the interior, though. I mean, again, like Emil Ikiori, he showed some stuff, but he's not like a sure thing. They have, of course, recruited well because they're Alabama. Of course, they recruited well. But yeah, the fact that they had to do this, the fact that they had to go to the portal to shore up an offensive tackle position is very un-Saban-like to have to do this. I mean, because offensive line is such a position where you grow and develop on your roster, right? That's what set Alabama apart for so long, is their dominance in the trenches. And I've said, I've been pretty consistent. I think Alabama's the best team in the country. I think that they're the national championship favorites. I think that we're on an Alabama-Ohio State collision course in the national championship game. But if their offensive line is going to only be average, and not just average for like Alabama, but like average as an SEC unit, that's concerning to me. I mean, they have a lot of talent everywhere else. I think that obviously their skill position talents, adding Jermaine Burton, of course, from Georgia, that's going to help. Bryce Young is, to me, the best quarterback in the country, and I think their defense has a chance to be really good. But, like, if you're not going to be great on the offensive line, that makes things a whole lot harder.
Yeah. All right. Next pick to you. Who you got? Something as clever as Tyler Steen?
No, we're gonna stay a little bit bigger picture for the moment, and I'm gonna go to your neck of the woods, and I'm gonna pick Jim Knowles. I think that we mentioned it a little bit with Lincoln Riley. I think that it's tough to be a really offensive-minded coach and still instill a tough defensive philosophy. And we saw Jeff Hafley do it at a pretty high level. Of course, in Ryan Day's second season, that was right, second season. And
Jeff Hafley was year one for Ryan Day.
Year one.
Yeah.
And so, I think that when you have a defensive coordinator who can command a room and really knows what to do with his unit, it can change a whole lot. Because, as we know, talent is not the issue at Ohio State. I mean, they have guys that obviously were higher recruited, are more athletic than the guys that Jim Knowles coached at Oklahoma State. And so I think the question is going to be not will he be successful, but how quickly can he be successful? Because, of course, they get Notre Dame in week one. I don't expect Notre Dame to win that game, but I think that is going to be a good test for that defense right off the bat. I mean, there's going to be no adjustment period. There's going to be no, easing into it. It's Notre Dame right from the start. And so I think that that's going to be the question, because you look at Jim Knowles, what he did at Oklahoma State. It took a couple years because he wanted to find guys who fit his system. He wanted to find what works best. He wanted to evolve in some ways with the Big 12, and eventually he did. And again, I've said this over and over and over again. There was Georgia, which is the best defense in the country. There was Wisconsin, which was the second best defense in the country. And Oklahoma State had a case to be number 3. And I think that he's going to have a really good chance to continue that at Ohio State. I mean, his 3 safety look is going to be so much better a fit, I think, for the college football playoff than this single high garbage that Ohio State's run against Alabama and the like, And so I do think that this is a long-term move. And so this is really, I think, going to pay off in the playoff if it happens, right? When they do finally get to that round, they're probably going to have slightly more struggles against some of these Big Ten teams in order to be more prepared to be ready for the college football playoff. Because, obviously the the Big Ten is a bulky league. There's going to be times where they're just going to try to run it over guys. And Jim Knowles is going to set a safety up here to try to, stop an offensive tackle. And Illinois is going to run their 9 offensive lineman package. And it's going to be weird, but I think that it'll pay off. I think that this is the kind of hire that you need to make to win the national championship. And we'll see what happens. I mean, again, if it is a transitionary year versus being a year where Jim Knowles just takes the reins and runs with it, I think that really could determine whether Ohio State is truly a national championship caliber team.
I think he could have been the first pick. When I started making my list, he's the first name I wrote down because it's obvious. We've talked about him a lot on this podcast. We talked about him on the Big Ten show, the Big Ten preview we did last week. I think it's, as impactful an assistant coach hire that as Ohio State's ever made. I think it's as impactful an assistant coach hire as we've seen in college football in 15 years, because he's not like Lincoln Riley was a hugely impactful coordinator hire at Oklahoma. But a lot of times, Joe Brady, right, at LSU, Dave Aranda at LSU, when they paid him and got him from Wisconsin as a defensive coordinator. But a lot of those times, almost all those times, when you're getting like a coordinator that's really going to change your program, it's somebody on the way up, and you're catching them on the way up on their way to head coach. Jim Knowles is not that. Jim Knowles was the head coach at Cornell. Now he's been at Duke and Oklahoma State. He's not trying to get somewhere. He's where he was trying to get. It's like, what at this point in his career, what's he trying to be? A defensive coordinator at one of the best programs in the country. Okay, that's what he is. Almost $2 million a year. They had the number one offense statistically in the country last year. They should again this year. And will the defense be good enough? I mean, he had to get picked. He was going to get picked. But honestly, like straight up, if, as you've been saying multiple times, if you think it's Bama and Ohio State on a collision course, then it's Jim Knowles. It's, can he fix the defense? Because Bama, when you look at the best programs, Bama just moves assistant coaches in and out. So I don't think and we had this discussion on the Mount Rushmore assistant coach when we did the 4 best assistant coaches in the history of the college football playoff. You know, Lane Kiffin sort of changed the model at Alabama with what they wanted in an offensive coordinator. But then since then, right? Brian Daboll, he was important. Michael Oxley, he was important. Steve Sarkisian, he was important. Bill O'Brien, he's important. But nobody would rise to the level of Jim Knowles because they expect to move guys in and out. It's kind of how it works. Clemson, meanwhile, hasn't had to make a hire in a decade. So they just kept the same guy. Now, of course, it's important now, but they promoted from within. They didn't go get an outside guy.
I would say that Brent Venables is probably the last kind of hire like this that's been made. And because he was that kind of hire.
Yes. So, and that was 12 years ago at Clemson, whatever it was. So that idea, but like when you look at Bama just moves assistants in and out, Clemson keeps assistants forever. Ohio State is the team that's trying to be at that level of those two teams. And they made a save us. They made a come save us coordinator hire, which I don't know that a program this good, because even when Clemson hired Brent Venables, Clemson wasn't Clemson yet. Brent Venables helped make Clemson. Ohio State, they're like, hey, we're trying to win national titles. We're not quite there. To make a come save us coordinator hire at a program this established, there's not a gazillion examples that leap to mind. So Jim Knowles had to get picked. He was going to get picked. If we were just going straight up impact at a high level team, I absolutely think he could be the number one pick here. So that's a very good pick by you.
I think that you're actually forgetting when Bob Stoops made a come save us move and hired former Arizona coach Mike Stoops, and unfortunately they died.
Oh, not for real. The football team did. They're brothers.
Yes, their defense died.
Their defense
and it never came back.
They're brothers, though. They're brothers. It's hard to keep. There's so many Stoopses. I don't even know what's the plural of Stoops. Is the plural of Stoops, or is the plural of Stoopses? Like moose. It's not mooses. As much as you might think it should be mooses, it's not. It's also not meese. It's moose. Has anyone asked them that? Bob. Is the plural of Stoops? Do you know? You're a national writer. You should know this.
I primarily hear them referred to as the Stoops brothers to try to avoid that very issue.
Exactly. See, people are trying to get around it. You're looking for off-season content. The correct pluralization of the best head coaches of the last 15 years in college football. It's like you had one Lincoln Riley, you have two Lincoln Rileys.
It's well, we'll see. I think that maybe this story is if you haven't been watching college football up until the last 5 years, you're probably like, why is there so much conversation about the Kentucky coach and an Alabama analyst? Why is there so much conversation about this?
It's just grammar. It's just a grammar conversation. That's all. All right, I'm going to make another attempted clever pick, and I'm going to take Utah cornerback Travis Broughton.
Okay.
And here's why. Clark Phillips is the number one corner for Utah. He's quite good. Last year in the Rose Bowl, Utah literally didn't have a second cornerback. They were moving guys from other positions to play that other second cornerback spot. They had so many injuries. Broughton got hurt early last year and was out. He's back. He looked good in spring. If Utah can stop the passing game, right, they're a good defense. If they have two corners they can rely on, I like Cam Rising at quarterback. I like their running back. I like their tight ends. I think they're good. They're going to be right there with USC. But when they play USC in the Pac-12, if they have a gigantic hole in their secondary, you know who's going to take advantage of that? Jordan Addison, Mario Williams, Caleb Williams, and Lincoln Riley. So Travis Broughton, if he's and he's back healthy, his injury last year helped blow a hole in that secondary. I think the play of Utah's secondary might be the deciding factor of who wins the Pac-12. And who wins the Pac-12? They haven't been in the playoff mix, the Pac-12. They should be in the playoff mix this year. When you have two programs as good right now, and not just programs, but teams right now, the specific teams, the players, the coaches right now, Utah and USC are playoff caliber in 2022. And the team that wins the Pac-12, I think, has a chance. It feels like an Alabama Ohio State collision course. I think USC and Utah maybe both have a chance to be good enough that they're not just semifinal fodder. I think they might have a chance to do something, but they got it. But only one's going to make it. And whether or not Utah can slow down the USC passing attack at all, I think is probably the determining factor there. So, Travis Broughton, the number 2 corner at Utah, is my next pick.
I definitely disagree with you that that either of these teams can beat Ohio State or Alabama unless Ohio State doesn't improve, to be honest, on the defensive side of the ball. But I do think that there is a very, very legitimate chance. Let me take a step back. The Pac-12 eliminated divisions for this season, and they're just going to take number 1 versus number 2 to play for the Pac-12 championship. This is made to be a rematch of USC Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. Like, I think it would be quite a disappointment, honestly, if this was not a top 10 matchup with a playoff spot on the line in the Pac-12 championship game. That feels like what this should be. And so I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, USC, just the number of receivers that they have is ridiculous. Like, they had Mario Williams there. They obviously added, I think, 2 or 3 other transfer receivers, including Jerry Rice's son. And they're like, hey, what if we also had the Biletnikoff winner? What if we just took him and mix that with Caleb Williams, mix that with Lincoln Riley? It's just ridiculous. Mix that with 1,200-yard rusher in the Pac-12, Travis Dye. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. But I think that you're right. Utah is a physical team. They are a tough defensive team. They've really made their hay, especially on the defensive line, in years past. But their cornerbacks historically are very, very good too. I should know. Jalen Jones, of course, a cornerback with the Chicago Bears now. But I think that they do have a chance to be special in that unit. They obviously return a lot of production across the roster. But if they can get that second cornerback down, I do agree that will be a huge key to them being able to keep up with Oklahoma's receivers. I'm sorry, with USC's receivers. Sorry.
You said that like I should know. You said that like I should know. I played cornerback at Utah. And it was like, no, you're just a Bears fan. I was like, what? Why should you know that? Did the guy go to your high school? Did you like babysit somebody who plays cornerback at Utah? It's like, oh no, just was a Bears fan. So they play October 15th in Salt Lake City. And it's like specifically like this game. It's like, oh, why did the Pac-12 get rid of divisions in a nanosecond as soon as the rule was passed? It's because they won a USC-Utah rematch. It's not theoretical. It's not because they want, oh, we don't want to have a North team in the champion. It's Utah-USC. Now, I don't know that 2 Utah-USC games is actually the best thing for the Pac-12. Why is that better? Because they're going to play on October 15th. And if that's the de facto championship game, then okay. Because if Utah wins at home and then USC beats Utah in the rematch in the Pac-12 championship game, who goes to the playoff? Is that better? Is that better for the Pac-12 that now their two best teams each have one loss and they split with each other, and now the committee has to figure that out? I don't know why it makes for a better game in the title game. It'll be more exciting. But as it stands right now, if you have divisions, and I'll get off of this because it's maybe worth a whole podcast or it's not worth anything, the two best teams have to play. Because if you're in opposite divisions, you play in the championship game because you're in opposite divisions. And if the two best teams are in the same division, you play during the regular season. So it's not like, oh, well, we have to have the two best teams in the playoff, two best teams in the championship game to ensure that they play each other. They're already guaranteed to play each other. They just might not play it in December on a neutral field in a game sponsored by a beverage. But that's okay. Like if you're creating a rematch, why do we need a second game? It might just be that the Pac-12 championship game is in October. So some of the conferences that are doing this, and they're all going to do it, I don't know if they actually are going to get what they want, because what they might get is a split and confusion. And there's only two options. Either you get the same result as the first time, and it's like, okay, well, why do we need to do that again? Or you get a split, and it's like, well, now what do we do? And I'm not sure either of those is good.
I have the answer for you. And the answer is, first of all, the Pac-12 has not been in the playoffs since 2016. That's important context. But let's look at USC, right? USC plays Utah on the road October 15th. They play Notre Dame at home November 26th. If they lose either of those games, 11-1 is not enough to get them into the playoff. They need to maximize their opportunities for elite games because they just don't have that many. Looking at the rest of their schedule, there's a lot of games I like. There's a lot of games I think will be a lot of fun. I'm excited for, USC Washington State. I'm excited for USC Oregon State. But those games are not getting USC into the college football playoff. They need to add as many quality matchups as they possibly can to have a chance. Because again, if they go through, and let's say from the North, let's say that it's number 24 Washington instead of number 8 Utah in the rematch, right? They can't afford to not have the best possible matchup. This is not the Big Ten. This is not the SEC. This is not a situation where these teams are just guaranteed if they win this game, if they go through and only lose one game in the regular season, they're going to be in the playoff. That's not how the Pac-12 works. I think that actually long-term, with the ACC, with the Pac-12 and the Big 12, they're going to move more towards this because they do need to maximize that 13th data point.
I don't think you get as much credit for a rematch. I don't think it counts as 2 wins in the minds of the committee. I think it counts as like 1.5. It's like we beat them and you beat them again. So I get it. It's like, well, we don't have that many good teams. Let's have the good teams play each other as much as possible. But I don't know. All right. I mean, I do know, but we're not going to do that right now. We might do it later. It might be a worthwhile discussion for later. Let's get to your 6th pick in this draft. Who is it?
All right. My 6th pick in this draft. So I've gone with a head coach at this point. I've gone with a defensive coordinator at this point. I think it's time just to take that quarterback, and I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to go with Bryce Young. Like you kind of mentioned off the top, obviously, I think Bryce Young is more of a known commodity than a lot of the quarterbacks who might be in this conversation. But I do think that he is going to be asked to play as important a role as any quarterback in the country in terms of his team being elite, because they do have guys coming in at receiver. They've got Jermaine Burton and Tyler Harrell. Of course, they were in the conversation for Jordan Addison, but like we saw, once those two receivers, John Mechie and Jamison Williams, both went down with injuries last year, they did not have a whole lot ready. It's been an offseason. They're going to have some young guys who I think are more ready than they were before, but at the same time, I don't think that this is an elite receiver group. I don't think that this is an elite offense. They have some nice pieces at running back. Obviously, the offensive line we've touched on, it's not going to be a great unit. I think that the one elite part of Alabama's offense is Bryce Young. And I think he's going to be asked to cover up for a whole lot just to give other players a chance to be special. So yes, I do think that there's a lot that makes sense to, I think that there's a lot that makes sense in terms of what we should expect of him. But if Bryce Young is 75% of the player that he was last year, I don't think that Alabama's a playoff team.
Okay. So this is, I was trying to figure out what the distinction is here. This is a good versus great distinction, right? Good Bryce Young versus great Bryce Young might be the difference of Alabama wins it all or Alabama doesn't make the playoff.
Yeah, and he has to elevate everybody around him, I think, more than people realize. You mentioned last year, what if we do have one of these all-time crazy quarterbacks in college football right now, and we just don't notice because he plays for Alabama? I think that this is the year where that really shines through because, I think last year they had no business, in my opinion, being in the national championship game based on what that roster was. And if their receivers aren't hurt, they might have a national championship under their belt, which I think that even Nick Saban would tell you would be their worst national championship team. So I think that heading into 2022, losing those two receivers to the first round of the NFL draft, I think that they have or losing one of them to the first round and one of them to the third round, I believe. But they have a chance, I think, to be really good, but only if Bryce Young continues to play at a Heisman caliber level. That is the level that he needs to play at for Alabama to be the kind of team that we expect them to be. And that is a high bar. Bryce Young has been so good for a full year at this point that I think that we expect that. But what he does is not normal. And I think that he needs to continue to be not just a good quarterback, but arguably the best quarterback in the country week in and week out for Alabama to really hit its ceiling.
Okay, 6 picks in, 4 picks to go. We'll get to those after this on the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. All right, pick number 7. I am going to double up on a team that we've already talked about because I don't have anybody. I only did 6 people and other people got picked. I was trying to think. I don't know who the Georgia person is on this. I don't want to say too much about Georgia because maybe you have somebody. I'm trying to think is it Will Muschamp and Glenn Schumann because they're the new defensive coordinators replacing Dan Lanning, but really it's still a Kirby Smart defense. Is it Stetson Bennett who's back at quarterback? Is it Jalen Carter as the heart of that? I couldn't figure out what single person to pick from the defending national champion Georgia Bulldogs, and I don't want to overlook Georgia, but I couldn't figure it out. I just think the Clemson situation of whether this is a team that has been right at the heart of everything to do with the playoff the whole time. They didn't make the first, they made the next 6, they didn't make it last year. Clemson being in versus not being in is a game changer. It is they are Clemson. They are the number 2 program in the country, and they weren't in it last year. And the difference of them getting in or not is such a huge deal. It changes everything else. Their defense is so good. I'm not picking a defensive person because it really is all about their quarterback play. So I am going to take Brandon Streeter, who's been their quarterback's coach, was the passing game coordinator last year with Tony Elliott after Jeff Scott has left. Now that Tony Elliott is gone as the head coach at Virginia, he is the offensive coordinator. But it's not even calling the plays. It's if DJ Uiagalelei is not getting it done and Cade Klubnik is ready, he's going to have to be the guy to tell Dabo, you've got to make the switch. And that decision in 2015, Ohio State's quarterbacks coach was new and was not able to figure out Cardale Jones and JT Barrett, and not figuring out quarterback torpedoed Ohio State's chances of repeating. Clemson's not trying to repeat, but if they can get quarterback right, I think they have enough. They certainly have enough on defense. Kobe Pace, Will Shipley in the backfield, good enough. Do they have enough at receiver? We'll see. But that's what held them back last year. And it might be the decision. Now, if it's getting DJ back to DJ, then there is no decision. Oh, no, he's awesome now. Great. But if they have to make a choice, do you go to the 5-star freshman, Cade Klubnik? Brandon Streeter's the guy in the room. And he's going to have to inform, perhaps persuade Dabo Swinney to maybe make a call here. And that's the kind of thing we've seen that, Shehan. We have seen quarterback changes determine national championships, whether it's at halftime of the national championship game or whether it's in October. So I think that's possible for this team. Alabama's not changing quarterbacks. Ohio State's not changing quarterbacks. Georgia, after what we saw last year, they're not changing quarterbacks. USC's not changing quarterbacks, right? This is the place where there's maybe a pivot point at the most important position on the field. So I'll take not one of the quarterbacks. I'll take Brandon Streeter, the guy in the room that maybe has to make that determination.
Does Brandon Streeter have to be the one who calls up Dr. Pepper and asks them to pull the ad? How does that work? I'm not familiar.
I don't know. I mean, it is one of those. Does DJ just have to like take his bag of money and be like, here, Cade? Like it is. It's one of the things. The thing about all this stuff with like the name, image, and likeness is these people are not great at picking who to give money to yet. Like they're given, everybody's given money because the collectives are all giving money on potential. Give the money to the established guys. You know who should have a lot of money right now? Bryce Young. Don't be giving it to recruits or guys who haven't done anything yet. So, yes, I don't know if Cade gets the bag or not.
I mean, to be clear, I don't necessarily know that they get better as time goes on because you could not go anywhere in America without seeing a Baker Mayfield commercial for like 3 years, even after he was proven to be only okay. But no, I think this makes a lot of sense. I think that this is going to be a moment where we see, is Dabo Swinney really going to be committed to running the same kind of program that he did before? Because there's no question that if Jeff Scott or Tony Elliott told him we need to make a quarterback change, then it's happening. Like he is listening to his guys. He's trusting his guys. And I think that just his decision to promote from within is a huge endorsement that he wants to continue that way. You know, I think that is such an interesting way to run a program where you really feel empowered within the confines of a program. But it is going to be put to the test in a different way this year with DJ, who, by the way, is a big face on that campus, is a big vocal guy in that locker room. To decide to sit him for a freshman would be a huge deal. And so it will be definitely interesting to see, is Brandon Streeter up to that challenge? And is Dabo Swinney going to kind of keep that thing going where he is kind of trusting these guys?
All right, pick 8 to you.
All right. I'm going to go back to the West Coast. I'm going to go back to USC. But I'm not going to go with any of these million offensive guys that they've got. I'm actually going to go with somebody who I think is one of the more underrated transfers that they've gotten. And that's Arizona State linebacker Eric Gentry. So Eric Gentry played a lot as a freshman last year, and it was a shock when he decided to leave Arizona State for the transfer portal. He was kind of like the Jaden Daniels on the defensive side of the ball for them. As a freshman last year, 45 tackles, 5 tackles for loss. He plays linebacker. I think what USC is going to need defensively, they brought in like 4 or 5 cornerbacks through the transfer portal. They've got some guys coming in. Damani Jackson's a top 10 player in the country, a 5-star recruit who I think is going to compete for playing time at cornerback. So like, I feel like they have enough guys to be okay there. They weren't horrible on the defensive line last year. Obviously, you hope they grow up. I think that linebacker is really where they need to grow. And to have somebody as dynamic, somebody who gets behind the line of scrimmage, somebody who moves as well as Eric Gentry, I'll be curious to see where they deploy him exactly. He's huge. He's 6'6". They could put him on the edge. They could decide to put him in the middle. I'd be very curious to know. But they need somebody to step up at linebacker, I think, and really be a difference maker, really be a leader on that side of the ball. I think that Eric Gentry has a chance to be that guy. I'll also mention Shane Lee from Alabama, who transferred, but he was a guy as a freshman, had a great campaign, dealt with injuries, never really got back to what he was. But I think that Eric Gentry really is that guy. You know, if somebody does become an all Pac-12 player on the defensive side of the ball, I think it has a chance to be Eric Gentry.
It's a similar conversation as Ohio State, right? Like, you think, the offense should be great. Will the defense be good enough? Is that simplistic when we talk about USC? I thought maybe you'd go Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator here. I like going like this kind of player instead of Alex Grinch. Of course, we kind of know what Alex Grinch is, which is like, he's been okay. I don't know. Lincoln Riley has tied his ship to him, but is that the deal with USC? The offense is playoff worthy. The defense has to be good enough to not hold them back.
I mean, it would be a shock if USC didn't have a top 5 offense in the country, right? With what they have, with the teams that they go against who aren't necessarily prepared to stop them, right? Because I think that one thing that does get lost in all of this is the entire Big 12 is built to stop Lincoln Riley, because that's what every team has had to do for years at this point. Now he's going to a league where, what the hell is Jed Fish going to do against that? Well, What the hell is, what the hell is Herm Edwards going to do against that? This league is not yet built to stop the sort of aggressive stuff that Lincoln Riley can do. And now he's working with an even bigger talent advantage at USC versus some of these other teams in the Pac-12 and the historic Pac-12 South that I guess no longer exists anymore. I think it'll be interesting. And so I think that offensively, if they're not elite, I'm concerned about what Lincoln Riley's going to do there. Defensively, they've got a lot of questions. I've said this over and over again. USC was not a 4-8 team last year in terms of quality, right? I mean, they fired their coach after week 2, and guess what? Things sucked after that. Big surprise that the interim coach did not manage to hold things together. Who could have seen that coming? I've said the same thing about Washington. I think that Washington is very undervalued as a 5-7 team last year, because when you fire your coach midseason and things are a mess off the field, like that's not normal. That's losing a year, right? And so USC under Clay Helton was year in, year out an 8-win caliber team. I think that just bringing in Lincoln Riley and the guys that they brought in, that should be enough to get them to 10-11 right away. And so I think, though, that if they do that, it has to be building up on that defensive side of the ball. And they agree. They brought in 11 transfers on the defensive side of the ball, including guys like Eric Gentry and Shane Lee, and a bunch of guys on in the defensive backfield. So they know what's plaguing them, and I'll be curious to see if they can get it fixed right away.
All right, we've made 8 picks so far. 2 each from Alabama, Clemson, and USC. 1 from Ohio State, 1 from Utah. As we think about the playoff, is that reflective? Are we in the right range here?
No question. Okay. I mean, I think that we've talked so much about, obviously, those 4 teams that took up, heading into last year, 24 of the 28 playoff spots, I guess is what, 25 of the 32 now, since 3 of them missed the playoff last year. But these are teams that we expect to be in the conversation. I think that Alabama and Ohio State, again, we've mentioned, I think are the favorites. I think that USC and Utah are sort of the swing picks, right? They're the teams that I think have a chance to become the first team in the Pac-12 since 2016 to make the field. And Clemson, you can just never really count out, because they've been the number 2 team of the playoff era. So I think this is very representative.
And again, as we talked about, Lincoln Riley kind of just took the Oklahoma stuff with him to USC. So when we started this podcast, it was Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma. If you take the Oklahoma stuff with Lincoln Riley, that it's more about the coach and the program.
They're going to yell at you on Twitter for saying that, taking the Oklahoma stuff with you. They're going to. Oklahoma's a very proud program, Doug.
I mean, you could make like a Dylan Gabriel case, right? Oklahoma quarterback this year. Maybe you will. Well, you already made your quarterback choice, and I'm not taking him. There are Oklahoma people you could talk about here. There are Baylor people you could talk about here with our final pick. We haven't discussed anybody in the Big 12. You can't take Quinn Ewers. You took Bryce Young. You can't take Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, we're talking about the playoff. Why would we talk about Quinn Ewers?
What about week 2 when Quinn Ewers outplays Bryce Young? Then you'll eat those words. All right, I'm going to take my quarterback.
Good luck with that.
What? I could maybe editor, take that out. Take the thing about where I said Quinn Ewers is better than the Heisman winner. Sorry about that. No, leave it in. Leave it in. I have to stand by all the dumb stuff I said. Okay, this is my last pick. This is a weird one, but this is like a weird thing that I've been on. You get on things, you have like an opinion, and it's like you just keep saying the same. So I'm taking the BYU quarterback. I'm taking Jaron Hall. And this is why, because we've talked about, could BYU be the Cincinnati of this season? They have Baylor, they have Oregon, they have Notre Dame. And then I thought to myself, well, a couple years ago, BYU had a quarterback who was the number 2 pick in the draft, and it didn't matter for the playoff. But that was the COVID year in 2020. And BYU that year, because of COVID, because they're an independent, and all the conferences were like, we're not playing non-conference games, sorry. And they canceled everything. BYU in 2020 had games canceled against Michigan State, Minnesota, Utah, Arizona State, Stanford, and Missouri. So they had to patch together this crazy schedule. In 2020, Zach Wilson's the guy we're talking about. BYU went 11-1. Zach Wilson played at a level that made him the number 2 pick in the NFL draft. They played Navy, Troy, Louisiana Tech, Texas San Antonio, Houston, Texas State, Western Kentucky, Boise State, North Alabama, Coastal Carolina, San Diego State, and UCF. because they were desperate for games. So there was nothing like they were like a top 20, top 10 team. They got as high as number 8 after beating North Alabama. Then they lost to Coastal Carolina. So they got into the top 10 with that nothing schedule. They play Oregon and Baylor early. They play Notre Dame in the middle of the year. They will lurk. They are the everything falls apart and you're looking for a fourth team, which is what Cincinnati was last year. They're that team. And Jaron Hall has a chance to be a first-round pick at quarterback. And if he's awesome, you know what gets people's attention? Great quarterback play. He can move. He can throw off platform. He had a great year last year. They have a good enough schedule. If he is awesome, if it's like, hey, who are the 3 best quarterbacks in the country? Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Jaron Hall. That is going to help them lurk. I like them as a lurker, but he's the thing that makes them cool. So the idea of, again, it's like he's good. He was good last year. If he's excellent, if he's like, is that guy a top 10 pick? If that's the conversation we're having about him, and he's leading BYU to an undefeated season with wins over Baylor, Oregon, and Notre Dame, they might do more than lurk. So I just think he actually has a chance to be that impactful. It's like in the second tier, they're going to need help. Even if they're undefeated, they're going to need a little help. But if he's great, they'll be on the radar. So he's the quarterback that I had targeted here. I'll take him with my last pick, Jaron Hall at BYU.
Yeah, and I think that you make the comparison to Zach Wilson a couple of years ago. Like you said, the schedules are just something completely different. Like that's the biggest thing. Obviously, their 2020 team's always going to be remembered for going 11-1 and being top 10 and having the number 2 pick in the NFL draft. But the 2021 team was infinitely more impressive because of what they had to play. And they finished number 13 in the playoff rankings, which of course, like I kind of threw out on Twitter back in the time, very much an opportunity for the playoff committee to say, oh, they're 13 and the top 12 are all teams that made the New Year's Six games. How about that? So weird, even though Utah literally lost to BYU. Anyway, whatever. But you know, I think that BYU, if they go through this schedule, like if they go undefeated, there's no question they're going to be in the college football playoff. Like their schedule is so hard. It's so freaking hard.
I mean, it's one of those things. If the Pac-12 champ is undefeated and the Big Ten champ is undefeated and the SEC champ is undefeated and, you know, Georgia has 1 loss just to Bama, it's not a lock, but they're in the top 6 and they can yell. Their schedule's really good. The point is that the schedule's good enough that nobody will be like, they didn't beat anybody. But like, no, they beat like 3 top 15 teams.
Right. And so I think that that'll be enough. I mean, the reality is we never run into the situation where everybody's just undefeated. And, you know, especially in this upcoming year, again, I think that there are 2 elite teams in the country, Alabama and Ohio State, and it's going to be a lot of chaos, I think, outside of that. I think that a lot of different teams have a chance. Clemson has a chance to get back into it. USC and Utah, like we've talked about, BYU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. Like, there's going to be a lot of teams, I think, jockeying for 2 spots. And so if BYU goes through and beats a team, because look, you've got Baylor, who has a really good chance to compete in the Big 12. You got Oregon, who has a really good chance to compete in the Pac-12. You got Notre Dame, who should be a top 15 team. You got Arkansas. And then, you know, if Stanford couldn't suck, that would obviously help a whole lot. And then Utah State, who's the defending Mountain West champs, too. So you've got a lot of really good teams on your schedule. Even Boise State is going to be an interesting one. I think you'll get credit for that. You know, Liberty, we'll see how they are this year with Malik Willis gone. But there's a lot of opportunities for them to look really good. And if they go through and they beat all those teams, and especially if some of these teams like Baylor and Oregon really show up once they get into conference play, it's going to help them out a whole lot.
So you think it's clever? I think I made a clever pick
I think it's clever. It is funny. I look at our list right now, and mine is very mainstream, and yours is very nerdy. I did not expect it to go that way when we started this exercise.
See, you think I'm basic. That's an insult, I think, right? My kids, that's a thing that the young people say, you're basic, right? Yeah. That you do the obvious thing like, oh, you know. So that's your view of me generally. And so then I take to Travis Broughton and you're like, whoa, here, what's going on here? So, okay, let's see if you can redeem yourself and maybe you can be a little less basic with your 10th pick here.
I will say, I mean, obviously I have no regrets about taking Bryce Young, because I do think he's going to be that important to the playoff race. But it is very like, there were a lot of off-board quarterbacks I really could have considered instead. And, just to mention, Blake Shapen from Baylor, like you mentioned.
Who just unseated the starter who made him transfer after spring ball.
Right. Like, you're talking about variance. That's a chance. Spencer Sanders, I think that he's a quarterback who everybody's waiting to have his Kenny Pickett moment. Caleb Williams, of course. Cam Rising at Utah, who you mentioned, I think is very good. But I think that if he is great, which I think is in the cards, that changes everything, I think, for that program.
Bunch of ACC quarterbacks, Tyler Van Dyke, Sam Hartman.
Incredible league for quarterbacks. We're going to have we talked about it a little bit, obviously, on our ACC preview, but we might have to go back and just have an episode where we just enjoy the ACC quarterbacks, because it is a crazy class this year. But I am going to go with another linebacker.
Ooh.
I'm going to go with Drake Thomas from NC State.
That is not basic. You get credit for that. This is very, 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 very clever.
Okay. Well, I will say, if you really know the ACC, then maybe it's slightly basic, but I don't think it's super basic. So I did have to double check that he was back, because his production was incredible last year. 99 tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 3 interceptions, a pick 6, a pass defense. He was everywhere for that North Carolina State defense, and they bring back a lot. They rank among the league, the national leaders in returning production on both sides of the ball, especially on defense. And they do bring back a great quarterback in Devin Leary, another quarterback who I could have probably considered for this list instead of picking the literal Heisman Trophy winner. But I think that North Carolina State, I've talked about it all offseason. This has to be their year. It has to be. With the quarterback that they bring back, who's going to be an NFL guy, Devin Leary, with the defense that they bring back, this has to be the year. And I think that defensively, Drake Thomas gives them something different than maybe what they've had in the past. They are used to having great linemen, and you expect that they're going to keep developing a guy in the offensive line to replace Ike Mekwanu, who obviously was picked in the first round of the NFL draft. I feel pretty good about that position. Defensive line, they continually put out guys, Bradley Chubb, that sort of archetype. I think that if they have a dynamic linebacker like Drake Thomas, he gives them a different dimension to their defense, and he's disruptive. I think that that's really what I want to see from North Carolina State defensively, is to continue to be disruptive, because they can play fundamentally sound and do all the right things, but I think that being disruptive is something that gives them a chance to be special. And again, I will keep coming back to NC State until the moment that they break my heart, because it's going to happen, because I've watched North Carolina State sports before, and it never ends the way that it's supposed to end. But they have a manageable non-conference. They play at Clemson on October 1st. I think that Drake Thomas has a really good chance to have a great game against Clemson on October 1st. And if that's the case, then they're in the driver's seat in the ACC. So they need to be really good. This has to be the year for them, in my mind, to win 10 games at least. And I think that Drake Thomas is going to be front and center in that effort.
I'm excited for NC State, for you to be what Iowa State was for me a year ago. So good luck, NC State, trying to not go 7-6.
And I will say, I would much rather bet on Devin Leary than I would on Brock Purdy. So
why did you have to say that? Why did you have to be like that, though? They had Breece Hall. How about betting on Breece Hall?
Breece Hall's great, but running backs do not carry you to the college football playoff.
Why did I even bring it up? I did it to myself. I thought I was done. I was done with my Iowa State pain.
I thought that Iowa State had finally faded into irrelevancy now that Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant, and we could be done with that.
USC, Bama, Clemson, 2 each. Utah, Ohio State, BYU, and North Carolina State, each with the 10 most important people for the college football playoff race in 2022. This is our free show for all you guys. We appreciate you guys listening to it. We do an Apple Podcast show every week as well. That's a bonus episode. You get 4 of those a month on Apple Podcasts. If you subscribe, it's $2.99 a month to subscribe. And you get 4 extra episodes of us. The plan for this week, we've been doing Mount Rushmores. We did one of them here on the free show. We're doing most of those on the bonus episodes. Head coaches. The 4 best head coaches in the history of the college football playoff. Now, It's not only going to be a Nick Saban conversation, and it's not only going to be a Dabo Swinney conversation, because once you get past those, then it gets a little interesting. So we'll have that conversation for Apple Podcast subscribers this week. Still ahead, we're going to continue to work through other conferences. We've done the ACC, their playoff preview. We've done the Big Ten, their playoff preview. On deck, we have a great Big 12 contributor lined up to join us. We're going to do the SEC soon. We're going to do the Pac-12. We're going to get to those conferences as well. Thanks to you guys for listening. Make sure you're reading Shehan Jeyarajah at CBS Sports. For Shehan, I'm Doug, and that was the College Football Survivor Show. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.